I sat there at the kitchen table, the dim light above casting shadows over the notepad in front of me, my pencil scratching numbers into the margins like it was some kind of desperate prayer. Money was tight, tighter than it had been in years, and I'd been running the math over and over, trying to make sense of it all. A family vacation? Forget it. We'd agreed, Olivia and I, that every penny needed to go toward the essentials. The mortgage, the groceries, keeping the lights on. She'd nodded along when I explained it, her face soft and understanding, like she got it, like we were in this together. Over the phone, her mother, Caroline, had sighed loud enough for me to hear through the speaker, going on about how sad it was we couldn't get away, how unfortunate life could be. I rolled my eyes at that, but I let it go. The decision was made, and I figured that was that. We'd buckle down, save up, and maybe next year we'd have something to look forward to. That's what I told myself as I closed the notepad and pushed it aside, feeling a little relieved that Olivia hadn't fought me on it. A week later, everything changed. I was scrolling through my phone, just killing time after a long day, when I saw it. A picture that hit me like a punch to the gut. There was Olivia, my wife, grinning wide, holding a glass of champagne next to her mother, both of them dressed up like they were headed to some fancy gala. The background wasn't our living room or the backyard. It was the plush interior of a first-class airplane cabin. Mid-flight, they were on their way to some luxury resort I'd never even heard of. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight I could barely breathe. I stared at the screen, my thumb frozen over it, waiting for my brain to catch up with my eyes. They'd gone without me, without even a word. I kept my mouth shut, though. Maybe there was a reason, I told myself. Maybe it was a last-minute thing, a gift from someone else, something I didn't understand yet. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, didn't want to let the heat rising in my chest take over. So I waited. When Olivia walked through the door a few days later, her suitcase rolling behind her, I was ready to hear her out. She looked tanned, relaxed, like she'd just come back from paradise. I forced a smile, asked her how it went, kept my voice steady even though my hands were clenched under the table. She smirked at me, smirked like she was proud of something, and said, "Maybe next time, you should work harder." The words landed like a slap, sharp and cold, and I felt my jaw tighten. Work harder? Me? The guy who'd been breaking his back to keep us afloat while she apparently sipped champagne at 30,000 feet? I wanted to fire back, to ask her what the hell she meant, to demand answers about where the money came from and why she'd lied. But I didn't. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted metal, nodded like it didn't faze me, and let her walk off to unpack. She had no clue what she'd just started. That little jab, that smug look, she'd lit a fuse, and I wasn't about to let it burn out quietly. I'd figure this out, one way or another, and when I did, she'd see I wasn't the pushover she thought I was. The next few hours, I sat there in the silence of our house, replaying her words in my head. Work harder, as if I hadn't been the one keeping us steady, cutting corners, saying no to things I wanted just so we could make it through the month. The picture of her and Caroline kept flashing in my mind, their smiles mocking me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. How had they paid for it? We didn't have that kind of cash lying around. I'd made sure of that with my endless budgeting. I started to wonder if I'd missed something, if there was a piece of this puzzle I hadn't seen yet. Olivia was upstairs, humming to herself like nothing had happened, and I realized I couldn't just sit there pretending everything was fine. I needed to know the truth, even if it hurt, even if it turned everything I thought I knew about us upside down. So I made a choice right then, not to confront her, not yet, but to watch, to listen, to figure out what she was hiding. She thought she'd gotten away with it, that I'd just roll over and take it. She was wrong. This was only the beginning, and I was going to find out exactly what she'd done. I woke up the next morning with a heaviness in my chest, like someone had dropped a brick on me while I slept. Olivia's words from last night, "Maybe next time, you should work harder," kept echoing in my head, each replay stoking the fire that had started burning inside me. I could still see that smirk on her face, the way she'd tossed it out so casually, like it was nothing, like I was nothing. I rolled out of bed, my feet hitting the cold floor, and glanced over at her side. She was still asleep, her breathing soft and steady, looking peaceful in a way that made my stomach churn. How could she sleep so easy after what she'd done? After lying to me, breaking our agreement, and then rubbing it in my face? I pulled on my clothes and headed downstairs, determined to keep my cool. I wasn't going to let her see how much it got to me. Not yet. If she wanted to play games, I'd play along, but on my terms. In the kitchen, I made coffee, the gurgle of the machine filling the silence while my mind raced. Olivia had always been tight with her mom. Caroline, too tight, if you asked me. They'd talk for hours on the phone, giggling like schoolgirls, planning things I was never part of. I'd never minded much before. It was just how they were. But this trip? This was different. We'd sat right here at this table, her nodding while I explained why we couldn't afford a vacation, and then she'd gone anyway. First class, no less. With champagne and luxury resorts. The more I thought about it, the hotter that fire in my chest burned. I'd sacrificed for us. Skipped nights out, fixed the car myself instead of paying a mechanic, even worked extra shifts when I could. And she'd taken that sacrifice and thrown it back at me like it was a joke. I gripped my mug a little too hard, the heat seeping into my palms, and told myself to calm down. Losing it wouldn't help. I needed to be smart about this. When she finally came downstairs, her hair messy and her eyes still sleepy, I forced a smile. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice light, like nothing was wrong. She mumbled something back, grabbed a cup, and poured herself coffee, acting like it was just another day. I watched her move around the kitchen, waiting for her to bring it up, to say something about the trip or that little jab she'd made. But she didn't. She just sipped her coffee and scrolled through her phone, humming again like she had last night. That's when I decided to test her. "So," I said, leaning back in my chair, "how was the trip? You and your mom looked like you had a blast." She glanced up at me, and there it was again, that smirk, small but sharp, like she was daring me to push harder. "Oh, it was amazing," she said, her voice all bright and bubbly. "The resort was gorgeous. The food was to die for. You should have seen it." She went on, talking about five-star dinners and spa days, every word digging a little deeper into me. I nodded along, keeping that smile plastered on my face, even though my hands were balled into fists under the table. She didn't stop there, either. "We met some really fun people," she added, casual as anything, like it was no big deal. "This one guy, Mark, he owns a yacht. Took us out on the water one day. Mom loved it. Fun people. A yacht." I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I laughed, a short, fake chuckle, and said, "Sounds like you didn't miss me too much, huh?" She shrugged, still smirking, and went back to her phone. That was it. She thought I was buying it, that I was too dumb to see through her. Fine, I thought. Let her think that. Let her believe I was just some clueless husband who'd swallow her stories and move on. I wasn't going to call her out, not yet. I'd keep pretending, keep acting like everything was normal, while I figured out what was really going on. The rest of the day, I played my part. I asked her little questions about the trip, nothing too serious, just enough to keep her talking. She'd laugh, toss her hair, tell me about the fancy cocktails or how Caroline flirted with some waiter. I'd nod, smile, even throw in a "wow, that's great" here and there. Inside, though, I was boiling. Every word she said made it clearer. She didn't care that she'd gone behind my back, didn't care that we'd made a plan together, and she'd trashed it. She thought she'd pulled one over on me, and that smirk told me she was proud of it. But I wasn't the fool she took me for. I'd spent years working hard, keeping us steady, and I wasn't about to let her walk all over me. As she rambled on, I made up my mind. I'd dig into this, find out how deep the betrayal went. She could smirk all she wanted now, but I'd have the last laugh. For now, though, I'd keep pretending, keep the peace, and let her think she'd won. She had no idea what was coming. I couldn't sleep that night. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on you, makes your thoughts too loud to ignore. Olivia was upstairs, probably dreaming about champagne and yachts, while I sat on the couch in the dark, staring at nothing. That smirk of hers kept flashing in my mind, the way she'd brushed me off like I was some loser she pitied. It wasn't just the trip anymore, it was everything it stood for. We'd made a deal, a promise, and she'd broken it without a second thought. The more I replayed it, the angrier I got. How long had she been playing me? How much had she been hiding? I couldn't just sit there and let it eat at me. I had to know. So I grabbed my laptop from the coffee table, flipped it open, and started digging. First stop was our bank account. I logged in, my fingers shaky on the keys, half expecting to see nothing out of the ordinary. But there it was, plain as day, a big transfer to Caroline's account, dated just a few days before they'd left. My heart sank, then started pounding. It wasn't a small amount, either. Thousands, way more than we could spare. This wasn't some surprise gift from a rich friend or a lucky win. Olivia had paid for that trip, and she'd used our money to do it. I leaned back, running my hands through my hair, trying to wrap my head around it. We'd been scraping by, cutting corners, and all that time she'd been siphoning cash for a luxury getaway with her mom. I felt sick, like the ground had dropped out from under me. But I wasn't done yet. I needed to see how far this went. I scrolled back through the statements, month after month, my eyes scanning every line. That's when I saw it wasn't just the trip. There were other transfers, smaller ones, sneaky ones, going to a different account I didn't recognize. Coffee shop charges I'd never seen, online shopping sprees, dinners at places we never went together. She'd been at this for a while, hiding it all behind her sweet smiles and nods of agreement. I clicked into the account details, my hands cold now, and found it was a separate savings account in her name only. My name wasn't on it. Our joint money was, though. She'd been moving bits and pieces over for months, building up her own little stash. I wasn't just her husband anymore. I was her ATM, a backup plan she could bleed dry while I worked my ass off. The anger hit me hard then, a wave that made my chest tight and my head throb. I wanted to storm upstairs, shake her awake, and demand to know why. Why she'd lied. Why she'd used me like this. Why she thought she could get away with it. But I didn't. I closed the laptop, set it back on the table, and sat there, breathing slow, letting the fury settle into something colder, something sharper. Confronting her now would just give her a chance to lie more, to twist it around on me. No, I had to be smarter than that. I had proof now, screenshots, numbers, dates. She didn't know I'd seen it, didn't know I was onto her. That was my edge, and I wasn't going to waste it. I spent the next hour digging deeper, pulling up every record I could find. Credit card statements, old emails, anything that might show me the full picture. It got uglier the more I looked. Spa days she'd told me were free from a friend. Clothes she'd said were on sale. Even a weekend trip last year she'd claimed was for work. Lies on top of lies. All paid for with money I'd earned, money we'd agreed to save. I thought about all the times I'd come home tired. All the nights I'd stayed late at the office. All the things I'd said no to so we could build a future. And she'd been laughing behind my back, living it up with her mom, treating me like a fool. It wasn't just about the cash. It was the betrayal, the way she'd looked me in the eye and agreed to my face while planning this all along. By the time the sun started peeking through the blinds, I'd seen enough. My eyes were dry, my head ached, but my mind was clear. Olivia wasn't the woman I'd married, or maybe she'd never been. Either way, I wasn't going to let her keep doing this. I'd trusted her, believed in us, and she'd turned me into a stepping stone for her and Caroline's good time. I shut the laptop, leaned back on the couch, and made a decision. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I'd keep quiet for now, let her think she was still in control, but I was done being her doormat. I'd figure out my next move, something to make her see she'd messed with the wrong guy. She thought I didn't know, thought she'd won. She was wrong, and I was going to prove it. I woke up with a plan forming in my head, the kind of plan that felt solid, like a wall I could lean on. The anger from last night hadn't gone away. It was still there, simmering under my skin, but I wasn't going to let it spill out. Not yet. Olivia didn't know I'd spent half the night digging through our finances, piecing together her lies. She didn't know I'd seen the transfers, the secret account, the whole rotten mess she'd built behind my back. That was my power now, and I was going to use it. I got up, showered, and put on my best everything's fine face before heading downstairs. She was already in the kitchen, flipping through a magazine, acting like the world was hers. I poured myself some coffee and smiled at her, keeping it light, keeping it easy. She barely looked up, just mumbled a good morning, and I thought, good. Keep thinking I'm clueless. I didn't confront her. I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I started setting things up, moving pieces she wouldn't see until it was too late. First, I called a lawyer. Not some loudmouth from a TV ad, but a guy a buddy at work had used for his own divorce. Quiet, sharp, no nonsense. I met him at a diner across town during my lunch break, sliding into the booth with a folder of printouts, bank statements, screenshots, everything I'd found. He flipped through it, nodding, his pen tapping the table. "You've got a solid case here," he said, his voice low. "She's been moving joint funds without your consent. That's a breach of trust, legally speaking. We can work with this. I told him I didn't want to file anything yet, just wanted to know my options, get the paperwork ready. He agreed, said he'd draft something up and keep it on hold. I left that meeting feeling a little lighter, like I'd taken back some control. Back home, I kept the act going. Olivia was on the phone with her mom when I walked in, laughing about something, probably planning their next big adventure on my dime. I waved at her, casual as anything, and she waved back, still giggling. It took everything in me not to snatch that phone and tell Caroline what I thought of her, but I held it in. Instead, I went to my laptop and started making changes, quiet ones. I logged into our bank accounts, switched the passwords, and set up alerts for every transaction. I didn't drain anything or lock her out, not yet, but I made damn sure I'd know if she tried moving money again. Every click felt like a small victory, a step toward taking back what was mine. She didn't notice a thing, too busy chatting away, her voice floating through the house like nothing was wrong. Then I got an idea, a way to test her, to push this a little further without tipping my hand. I waited until dinner, when we were sitting across from each other at the table, picking at some leftovers. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone easy. "What if we had your mom over this weekend? Been a while since we all hung out." Her face lit up, like I'd just handed her a gift. "Really? That'd be great. She'd love that." She started talking about what we'd cook, how fun it'd be, and I nodded along, smiling like I meant it. Inside, I was setting a trap. Caroline was part of this. She'd been in on the trip, sipping champagne right next to Olivia. I wanted to see them together, watch how they acted, maybe catch something I could use. Plus, I figured it'd keep Olivia off guard, thinking I was still the same old pushover she could string along. Saturday came, and Caroline showed up at our door, all loud and dramatic like always. She hugged me too hard, her perfume choking me, and launched into a story about some neighbor's dog before she even sat down. Olivia beamed at her, the two of them thick as thieves, and I played my part, grinning, pouring wine, asking questions about their trip. Caroline couldn't help herself. She started bragging. "Oh, that resort was divine," she said, swirling her glass. "Men should be providers, you know? A real husband wouldn't let his wife miss out on luxury like that." She shot me a look, half smirking, like she was testing me. Olivia laughed, nodding along, and I felt my teeth grind together. I wanted to fire back, tell her I'd provided plenty until they stabbed me in the back, but I didn't. I just smiled wider, said, "Yeah, maybe next time," and let them keep talking. Dinner dragged on, every word out of their mouths making my blood boil a little more. Caroline went on about how deserving they were, how hard life was without little treats, while Olivia chimed in with details about the spa, the food, the fun people they'd met. I kept my cool, nodding, laughing when they did, even topping off their glasses like a good host. They didn't suspect a thing, thought I was eating it up, happy to play the fool. But inside, I was building something, a plan that'd hit them where it hurt. They wanted a provider? I'd show them just how much I could provide, and how fast I could take it away. By the time Caroline left, waving dramatically from the driveway, I knew what I had to do. This dinner was just the start. They'd learn soon enough who they were dealing with. I'd been waiting for the right moment, and it came a week later at Olivia's sister's house. It was a family gathering. Nothing big, just a barbecue in the backyard with her siblings, her parents, a few friends we both knew. The air smelled like grilled meat and smoke. Kids were running around yelling, and everyone was laughing over beers and burgers. Olivia was in her element, chatting with her sister, her mom hovering nearby like always. I'd been playing the good husband all week, smiling, asking about her day, acting like that dinner with Caroline hadn't left me steaming. She thought she had me wrapped around her finger, and I let her believe it. But today, with everyone here, I decided it was time to pull the pin on this grenade I'd been holding. I wasn't going to scream or fight. I was going to let the truth do the work for me. I waited until we were all sitting around the picnic tables, plates piled with food, the chatter loud and easy. Olivia was next to me, sipping a soda, her mom across from us telling some over-the-top story about a sale at the mall. I leaned back, took a bite of my burger, and then said it, loud enough for everyone to hear but casual, like it was no big deal. "You know, I was pretty bummed we couldn't afford that family vacation this year." I paused, letting the words hang there, and a few heads turned my way, her brother, her dad, a couple friends. Olivia froze, just for a second, But I kept going. I mean, we talked about it, right? Money's tight, gotta save up. But then I saw that picture of you and Caroline in first class, sipping champagne on the way to that resort. Guess I missed the memo on that one. I chuckled, keeping it light, like I was confused instead of pissed. The table went quiet, like someone had flipped a switch. Olivia's sister, Jen, stopped mid-sentence, her fork halfway to her mouth. Her brother, Mike, raised an eyebrow, looking from me to Olivia. Caroline coughed, loud and fake, like she was trying to cover it up. I didn't stop there, though. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the folded stack of papers I'd brought, and slid them onto the table. Funny thing, I said, unfolding them slow. I checked our bank stuff after that. Found this transfer to your mom's account, Liv. Big one, right before you left. And then there's this other account, your secret one. Been moving money there for months, huh? I spread the pages out, screenshots, statements, all the proof I'd gathered. The numbers stared up at everyone, cold and clear. You could have heard a pin drop. Jen leaned over, squinting at the papers, her face going from curious to shocked. Mike grabbed one, his jaw tightening as he read. Olivia's dad, Tom, a big guy who always talked about honesty and hard work, picked up a statement, his eyes narrowing. Caroline started sputtering, her voice high and shaky. This is ridiculous. It's not what it looks like, she said, waving her hands like she could swat the truth away. Olivia's face went white, then red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I didn't, she stammered, but it was too late. Everyone was looking at her now, and not in a good way. Tom was the first to speak, his voice low and hard. Olivia, what the hell is this? He held up the paper, pointing at the transfer. You told us you couldn't afford a trip, and then you pull this? With his money. Jen jumped in, her voice sharper. Wait, you went first class? While he's here working. Are you serious? Mike just shook his head, tossing the paper back on the table like it burned him. Caroline tried to cut in again, saying something about how it was a misunderstanding, but Tom shut her down fast. Caroline, stay out of this. You're in it too, aren't you? His glare moved between them, and I could see it. He was disgusted, the kind of disgust that comes from realizing your own family's let you down. Olivia turned to me, her eyes wide, then narrow. You didn't have to do this here, she hissed, low enough that only I could hear. I just smiled, calm as anything, and said, why not? They're family, right? Figured they'd want to know. She glared at me, but there was nowhere to hide. Jen was already asking questions. How much did you take? What else did you spend it on? And Tom was staring at Olivia like he didn't recognize her. Friends were whispering now, heads together, stealing glances at us. Caroline tried one more time, her voice whiny. We just needed a break. Tom, you don't understand. But he cut her off again, slamming his hand on the table. A break? With his money? You don't get to play victim here. The whole thing unraveled fast. Olivia grabbed her purse, muttering something about needing air, and stormed off toward the house. Caroline followed, still babbling excuses, but no one was buying it. I stayed put, picking at my food, letting the chaos settle around me. Tom looked at me, his face heavy. I'm sorry, man, he said, quiet. I didn't know she'd do something like this. I nodded, shrugged, kept it simple. Yeah, me neither. Inside, though, I felt good, better than I had in weeks. They'd seen her for what she was now, and there was no taking it back. She could run inside, cry, yell, whatever, but the truth was out, and it was mine to wield. This was just the start, and I was ready for whatever came next. I watched Olivia storm off into her sister's house, the screen door banging shut behind her, and I stayed right where I was at that picnic table. The backyard was still buzzing with tension, like the air itself was holding its breath after what I'd just done. Jen was muttering under her breath, flipping through the papers I'd laid out, while Mike just sat there, arms crossed, shaking his head. Tom, Olivia's dad, kept staring at the spot where she'd disappeared, his face a mix of anger and disappointment. Caroline had followed her inside, her high-pitched excuses fading as they went, but out here, the family was already turning on them. I didn't say much, just let it play out, picking at the cold fries on my plate, feeling the weight of their eyes on me. They didn't know what to say, and I didn't need them to. The truth was doing its job. Jen was the first to break the silence, her voice sharp and loud enough to carry. She's so selfish, she said, tossing a bank statement back onto the table. I can't believe she'd do this to you. And with Mom egging her on? Unreal. Mike nodded, leaning forward now, his elbows on the table. Yeah, man, that's low. Taking your money like that? After you guys agreed to save? That's messed up. I shrugged, keeping my tone even. Guess I wasn't part of the plan, I said, and that got a grim chuckle out of him. Tom didn't laugh, though. He just rubbed his forehead, looking older than I'd ever seen him. I raised her better than this, he muttered, more to himself than me. And Caroline, God, I should have seen this coming. His words hung there, heavy, and I could tell he was blaming himself a little, even though this was all on them. The friends at the other end of the table were whispering now, sneaking looks my way, some shaking their heads, others murmuring about how shady it was. I caught bits and pieces. First class? Really? And poor guy didn't even know. And it felt good, in a strange way. Not the pity, but the fact that Olivia couldn't hide anymore. Her perfect little image was cracking, and everyone could see it. Jen turned to me, her eyes fierce. You're not letting this slide, are you? She can't just walk away from this. I met her gaze, kept my face steady. I'm handling it, I said, simple as that, and she nodded, like she trusted me to make it right. Tom looked up at me then, his voice gruff. You should have told me sooner, son. I'd have straightened her out. I just nodded back. No point in saying I'd only figured it out myself a week ago. He was on my side now, and that's what mattered. Inside, I could hear raised voices, Olivia and Caroline, probably arguing about what to do next. Part of me wanted to go in there, see the panic on their faces, but I stayed put. Let them stew. Then the door flew open, and Olivia marched back out, her cheeks flushed, her eyes locked on me. She didn't sit down, just stood there, hands on her hips, glaring like I'd crossed some line. You set me up, she hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear, but aimed right at me. The chatter stopped again, all eyes on us. I leaned back in my chair, calm as could be, and smiled up at her. No, Olivia, I said, my voice steady. You did that to yourself. Her mouth opened, then shut, like she couldn't find the words. She wasn't used to me pushing back, not like this. The family jumped in before she could try again. Jen snorted, rolling her eyes. Oh, please, Liv. You got caught, that's all. Don't act like he's the bad guy here. Mike chimed in, his tone flat. You took his money and lied about it. What did you expect him to do, clap for you? Tom didn't say anything, just stared at her, his disappointment louder than words. Caroline poked her head out then, still inside the doorway, and tried to back her up. It's not that simple, you're all blowing this out of. But Tom cut her off, his voice booming. Enough, Caroline. You're as bad as she is. Sit down or go home. She shrank back, and I almost laughed. Almost. Olivia's face twisted, anger and embarrassment all mixed up, and she pointed at me. This isn't over, she snapped, then turned and stormed off again, this time toward the driveway. I heard her car keys jangle, the engine start, and then she was gone, tires crunching on gravel. Caroline hesitated, then scurried after her, leaving the rest of us in the backyard. I didn't move, just took a sip of my beer, letting the coolness settle me. Jen looked at me, half smirking. She thought you'd chase her, huh? I shrugged. She's wrong. Mike clapped me on the shoulder, a rare grin on his face. Good for you, man. She's got no one to blame but herself. The rest of the night went quiet. People ate, talked in low voices, kept stealing glances at me. Tom pulled me aside before I left, his hand heavy on my arm. You're a good guy, he said. She didn't deserve you. I nodded, thanked him, and headed home. Olivia wasn't there when I got back, and I didn't care. The fallout was just starting, and I had bigger moves to make. She could run, she could yell, but she couldn't undo what she'd done. I'd made sure of that, and now I was ready to take it all the way. I got home from the barbecue and walked into a house that felt emptier than it ever had. Olivia wasn't there. She'd peeled out in her car after that blowout with her family, probably off to her mom's or some friend's place to lick her wounds. I didn't care where she went. The silence was a relief, honestly, after weeks of playing nice while she smirked and lied to my face. I dropped my keys on the counter, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat down at the kitchen table, the same spot where we'd agreed to skip that vacation. That memory stung, but it also fueled me. She thought she could just storm off and I'd sit here waiting? She was wrong. I'd already started moving the pieces, and by the time she figured it out, her whole world would be crumbling. First thing I did was finish what I'd started with our money. I'd changed the passwords last week, set up alerts, but now I went further. I logged into our joint accounts, checking, savings, everything, and locked her out completely. No more access. Her debit card? Useless now. I transferred what was left into a new account, one in my name only, and watched the numbers shift on the screen. It wasn't about being petty. It was mine, earned with my sweat, and she didn't deserve a dime after what she'd pulled. Then I tackled that secret savings account of hers, the one she'd been sneaking cash into for months. I couldn't drain it, not legally, not yet, but I called the bank, flagged it as part of a potential fraud case, and got it frozen pending investigation. The guy on the phone was calm, professional, said it'd take a few days to sort out. Good enough for me. Finally, I canceled our joint credit card, the one she'd used for her spa days and shopping sprees. One quick call, and it was gone. She'd find out soon enough. I was mid-sip on my beer when my phone buzzed. Olivia. I let it ring, watching her name flash on the screen, then go to voicemail. She called again, then a third time, and I just sat there, letting it hum against the table. Eventually, she gave up, and a text popped up instead. What the hell did you do to the accounts? I smirked, set the phone down, and didn't reply. Let her sweat it out. She'd figure it out when she tried to buy a coffee or gas up her car. Everything she'd taken for granted was gone now. I wasn't playing her game anymore. A few minutes later, another text. Mom's freaking out too. This isn't funny. That one made me laugh out loud. Caroline was in trouble too? Even better. I'd heard from Jen earlier. Tom had been so pissed at the barbecue that he'd cut Caroline off financially, locked her out of their joint stuff. The two of them were sinking together, and I wasn't lifting a finger to help. She showed up an hour later, bursting through the door like a tornado, her face red and her hair wild. What did you do? She yelled, slamming her purse on the counter. I stayed calm, leaning back in my chair, beer still in hand. What's wrong, Liv? I asked, like I didn't know. She glared at me, her voice shaking. The cards declined. The bank won't let me in. Everything's gone. Fix it now. I set the bottle down, slow and deliberate, and looked her dead in the eye. It's not your money anymore, I said. You don't get to use me like that and keep cashing in. Her mouth dropped open, like she couldn't believe I'd actually done it. Then she started screaming, calling me selfish, controlling, a jerk, anything she could throw at me. I didn't flinch. I just watched her unravel, her hands flailing, her voice cracking. When she paused to catch her breath, I stood up, walked to the counter, and pulled out the folder I'd prepared. Divorce papers, fresh from the lawyer, signed and ready to go. I slid them across to her, and her eyes went wide. What's this? She whispered, like she didn't already know. We're done, I said, keeping it simple. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. She stared at the papers, then back at me, and for a second, I thought she might cry. But then she laughed, sharp, bitter, like she was trying to turn it around. You think this scares me? She said. I'll fight this. You'll see. I didn't bite. I just shrugged and said, go ahead. Try. That shut her up fast. She knew I had the proof. Bank records. Her lies laid bare at the barbecue. She didn't have a leg to stand on. She grabbed the folder, her hands shaking, and flipped through it like she could find a way out. Then she switched gears, her voice dropping low, almost pleading. Come on, we can fix this, she said. It was a mistake, okay? I'll stop, I'll pay it back. I shook my head, done with her games. Too late, I said. You laughed at me, Liv. Told me to work harder while you spent my money. You don't get to beg now. Her face crumpled, and she went quiet, just staring at me. That smirk from a week ago? Gone. Now she was the one scrambling, and I wasn't giving her an inch. She snatched her purse and the papers, muttering something about calling her mom, and stormed out again. I sat back down, finished my beer, and felt the first real peace I'd had in months. This was just the beginning. She'd fight, sure, but I was ready. I stood there in the kitchen after Olivia stormed out, the door still rattling from how hard she'd slammed it. The divorce papers were gone with her, clutched in her hand, like she could somehow undo them by glaring hard enough. I didn't care. Let her take them. Let her read every word. I'd made sure they were airtight with the lawyer. The silence settled in again, thick and heavy, but this time it didn't bother me. It felt like a clean slate, like I'd finally shaken off the weight of her lies. She'd tried everything in that last fight, yelling, blaming me, even begging, but it didn't move me. I was done being her punching bag, her bank account, her fool. I grabbed another beer from the fridge, popped it open, and sat back down, letting the cold taste wash away the last of her voice in my head. The next few days, she kept calling. Nonstop at first, angry voicemails, texts demanding I fix the accounts, threats about lawyers and how she'd make me pay. I didn't answer, didn't text back. I just listened to her ramble, her voice getting shakier with every message, and then deleted them. She thought she could scare me into backing down, but she didn't get it. I had the upper hand now. The bank records, the family's reaction at the barbecue, all of it was on my side. She could scream all she wanted. It wouldn't change the numbers or the truth. Then she switched to sob stories, texts about how sorry she was, how it was all a mistake, how we could work it out. I read one where she said, "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just got carried away." And I almost laughed. Carried away? She'd planned that trip, hid that account, smirked in my face. That wasn't an accident. That was who she was. I stayed stone cold through it all, didn't give her an inch. But I wasn't just sitting around waiting for her to give up. I'd been digging deeper into her mess, and that's when I found the real kicker. I was going through old emails, hers, ones I'd gotten into with a password she hadn't changed, looking for more proof of her spending. Buried in a thread with Caroline from a year ago, I saw something that stopped me cold. Caroline had written, "You remember how I handled your dad back then? Same playbook, honey. Keep him in the dark, take what you need, and live a little." Worked for me. There was a winking emoji at the end, like it was some cute joke. I sat back, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. Olivia's mom had done this before, drained her ex-husband's accounts, spent it all on herself, then walked away when he caught on. Olivia had replied, "LOL, you're a pro, mom, teaching me the ropes." They'd laughed about it, like it was a family tradition. It hit me hard. Olivia hadn't just stumbled into this. She'd learned it, studied it, from the woman who'd raised her. Caroline had screwed over her first husband, Tom's predecessor, and now Olivia was running the same game on me. I dug more, found bank records from years back that matched up. Caroline's ex had gone bankrupt after she left, and she'd walked away with a cushy life. I printed it all out, added it to my folder, and felt a grim kind of satisfaction. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was a pattern, a legacy of betrayal. And I wasn't going to let it stay quiet. If Olivia wanted a fight, I'd make sure everyone knew exactly who she'd learned it from. I started spreading the word, slow and deliberate. First, I called Jen. Olivia's sister had been on my side since the barbecue. I told her about the emails, read her the worst parts, and she went quiet for a long time. "That's disgusting," she finally said. "Mom did that to Dad too. And Liv knew." I said yeah, sent her the screenshots, and let her take it from there. Next, I talked to Mike. He was less chatty, but when I showed him the proof, he cursed under his breath and said, "They're done, man. Nobody's gonna defend this." Tom got the full story too. I met him for coffee, laid it all out, and watched his face go dark. "Caroline's always been selfish," he said. "But teaching Olivia to do this? That's a new low." He promised to back me up, said he'd tell anyone who'd listen what they'd done. Word spread fast after that. Jen told their cousins, Mike talked to mutual friends, and Tom even called up some old family contacts. By the end of the week, Olivia's name was mud. Friends she'd bragged to about the trip stopped calling her back. Jen said they were grossed out when they heard the whole story. Her colleagues at work got wind of it too. Someone leaked it to her office chat, and suddenly she was the gossip nobody wanted to touch. Caroline wasn't faring much better. Tom had already cut her off, and now her own social circle was shrinking, people whispering about her gold digger past. Olivia's perfect little world wasn't just cracking, it was shattered, and I'd made sure of it. She showed up at the house one night, banging on the door, her voice hoarse from yelling. I opened it, stood there calm, and she glared at me, tears streaking her face. "You've ruined me," she said. "Everyone hates me now." I didn't flinch. "You ruined yourself," I told her. "I just let them see it." She tried to argue, but I shut the door and locked it. Her reputation was gone, and I wasn't sorry. She'd built her life on lies, and I'd torn it down with the truth. That was enough for now. I woke up the next morning to a quiet house, the kind of quiet that feels like a reward after a storm. Olivia hadn't come back after banging on the door last night. Her yells had faded into the distance, and I'd gone to bed with a strange mix of relief and satisfaction. She was falling apart out there, and I didn't have to lift a finger anymore. The truth had done its work, spreading like wildfire through her family, her friends, her whole little world. I got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where this all started with my scratched-out budgets and her fake nods. Now it was just me, and that felt right. Her perfect life was burning down, and I was finally free to watch it happen from a distance. The fallout hit her hard and fast. Jen called me that afternoon, her voice a mix of disbelief and glee. "Dad's done with her," she said. "Told Liv he's not helping her out, not after what she pulled. Said she's got to figure this out on her own." I could hear the smirk in her words. She'd never been close to Olivia, and this was like Christmas for her. "He's pissed about Mom too," she added. "Locked her out of everything. Bank, credit cards, all of it. They're both screwed." I nodded to myself, sipping my coffee, picturing Tom's stern face as he laid down the law. He'd always been big on fairness, and finding out Caroline had taught Olivia to scam me? That was a line he wouldn't cross. No money, no support. Olivia was cut off from the one person she might have leaned on. Caroline wasn't doing any better. Jen told me Tom had moved out of their place, crashing with Mike for a while, and left Caroline scrambling. She tried calling around, begging friends for help, but nobody was biting. "They all know now," Jen said. "That email you found. It's everywhere. People are calling her a leech, saying she's been playing this game for years." I'd sent those screenshots to Jen and Mike, and they'd made sure the story spread. Cousins, aunts, even some of Caroline's old church buddies got the details. Her reputation was toast, and without Tom's money, she was stuck. I could almost see her pacing her big house, phone in hand, realizing nobody was coming to save her. It was the same trap she'd set for her ex, only now she was the one caught in it. Olivia's friends dished her too. I got a text from a guy we both knew, Dave, who'd been at the barbecue. "Heard the whole story, man," he wrote. "Can't believe she did that to you. She's been calling, but I'm out. Too messy." That was the pattern. Her phone must have been lighting up with excuses, but nobody wanted the drama. Jen said she'd seen Olivia at a grocery store, looking rough, no makeup, paying with cash like her cards were dead. "She's got nothing left," Jen laughed. "Even her work people are avoiding her. Someone posted about it in their group chat, and now she's the office pariah." I didn't feel bad. She'd built her life on flash and lies, fancy trips, fake smiles. And now that it was gone, she had nobody to blame but herself. Me? I was fine, better than fine, actually. I started packing up the house that week, sorting through years of stuff we'd piled up together. Her clothes, her shoes, all those little luxuries she'd bought with my money. I boxed them up and left them by the door. I didn't need the reminders, and she could figure out what to do with them. I found a small apartment across town, nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with a decent view. Signed the lease, moved my stuff in over a couple days, and left the old place behind. It wasn't about running away. It was about starting over, shaking off the dust of her mess. The first night in the new place, I sat on a folding chair with a beer, looking out at the city lights, and felt the weight lift off my shoulders. No more pretending, no more lies, just me, and that was enough. Olivia tried reaching out a few times, texts, mostly, since I still wasn't picking up her calls. "Can we talk?" one said. "I'm sorry, okay? I messed up." Another, "You don't have to do this. I'll fix it." I didn't reply. She'd had her chance to fix it when she was sipping champagne with her mom, laughing at me behind my back. Now she was alone, and I wasn't her lifeline anymore. Jen kept me updated, said Olivia was crashing at a cheap motel, scraping by on whatever cash she had left. Caroline was in the same boat, holed up in her house, dodging calls from bill collectors. They'd built their castles on sand, and the tide had come in. I went back to work, picked up extra shifts, started saving again, not for us, but for me. A trip, maybe, or a new truck, something I wanted, something I'd earned. The guys at the shop heard bits of the story, clapped me on the back, said I'd dodged a bullet. They were right. Every day felt lighter, like I was waking up from a bad dream. Olivia's world was gone. Family, friends, money, all of it. And I didn't have to lift a finger to make it happen. She'd lit the match herself, and I'd just stepped back to watch it burn. For the first time in years, I felt like I was breathing again, and I wasn't looking back. I was sitting at a little cafe downtown a few months later, sipping coffee and flipping through a car magazine, when I saw her. Olivia. She stepped through the door, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, no trace of the polished look she used to have. She didn't notice me at first. Her eyes were on the counter, scanning the menu like it was a chore. I leaned back in my chair, watching her, taking in the changes. She looked tired, smaller somehow, like the weight of everything had finally settled on her shoulders. Her clothes were plain, jeans, a faded sweater, no designer labels or flashy accessories. The old Olivia would have swept in here like she owned the place, but this version just shuffled to the counter and ordered something cheap, counting out bills from a thin wallet. I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd made her bed, and now she was lying in it. I'd heard bits and pieces about her since I moved out. Jen kept me in the loop, said Olivia was still at that motel for a while, then bounced to a friend's couch until that fell through. Work had let her go, the gossip about her spending and the divorce got too loud, and they didn't want the headache. She tried fighting the divorce at first, hired some cut-rate lawyer with whatever money she'd scraped together, but it didn't go far. My lawyer had the bank records, the emails, the whole story locked down tight. She signed the papers eventually, got nothing but her own debt and a pile of clothes I'd left by the door. Caroline wasn't much help either. Tom had filed for divorce too, and she was stuck selling off jewelry to keep the lights on. They'd crashed hard, and I'd moved on. She turned from the counter with her coffee in hand, and that's when she saw me. Her eyes widened, just for a second, then narrowed like she was bracing herself. I didn't move, just kept my gaze steady, waiting to see what she'd do. She hesitated, then walked over, her steps slow, like she wasn't sure she wanted to be here. "Hey," she said, her voice quiet, rough around the edges. I nodded back, kept it simple. "Hey." She stood there, clutching her cup, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. I could tell she wanted to say something, but I wasn't going to make it easy for her. She'd lost that privilege a long time ago. After a beat, she tried again. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, gesturing at the empty chair across from me. I shrugged, didn't say yes or no, just watched her decide. She took it as a yes, slid into the seat, and set her coffee down, her hands wrapping around it like it was keeping her warm. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, forcing a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't smile back. "Yeah, well, it's a small town," I said, flipping a page in my magazine, letting her know I wasn't here for a big reunion. She nodded, looked down at her cup, and went quiet again. I could feel her fishing for something, words, an angle, a way in, but I wasn't biting. Finally, she spoke up, her voice low. "How've you been?" she asked, like we were old friends catching up. I set the magazine down, leaned back, and looked at her. "Good," I said. "Better than good, actually. New place, new start. You." It wasn't a real question. I didn't care much, but I wanted to see what she'd say. She swallowed, her fingers tightening on the cup. "Not great," she admitted, her eyes flicking away. "Things have been tough. Lost the job, lost a lot of people. You probably heard." I nodded, didn't say anything. She'd lost everything. Family, friends, money, and I wasn't surprised. She'd built it all on sand, and I'd watched it wash away. She took a shaky breath, then looked at me again, her face softer now, almost pleading. "I know I messed up," she said. "I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I didn't think it'd end up like this." I didn't react, just let her keep going. "I got caught up in it. Mom, the trip, all of it. I should have told you, should have been honest. I don't know. I thought I could handle it." Her voice cracked a little, and she stopped, waiting for me to say something. I didn't. I'd heard this before, the texts, the voicemails, the excuses. It didn't change what she'd done, didn't erase that smirk or the way she'd laughed at me. When I didn't respond, she leaned forward, her tone dropping even lower. "You didn't have to destroy me," she whispered, her eyes glistening now. "You could have just left, let it go. But you told everyone, turned them all against me. I've got nothing left." There it was, the blame, the last card she had to play. I took a slow sip of my coffee, set it down, and met her gaze, steady and calm. "Maybe next time, you should work harder," I said, throwing her own words back at her, sharp and clear. Her face froze, like I'd slapped her, and I saw the memory hit, her standing in our kitchen, smirking, thinking she'd won. She didn't say anything, just stared at me, her mouth tight. I stood up then, grabbed my magazine, and tossed a couple bucks on the table for the coffee. "Take care, Liv," I said, not mean, not soft, just done. She didn't move, didn't call after me as I walked out. I stepped into the cool air, the doors swinging shut behind me, and left her sitting there with her cheap coffee and her silence. I didn't look back. She'd had her shot, and she'd blown it. Now she could live with it, just like I'd lived with her lies. I headed to my truck, the sun dipping low, and drove off, feeling lighter than ever. That was the final goodbye, and I was good with it.